1942. The Japanese are poised to strike at India, brightest jewel in the crown of the British Empire. India had been invaded before, in 326 BC by Alexander the Great. In the 14th century, Tamerlane and his Tartars raided India and destroyed Delhi. And the Mongol came from the north in the 16th century. And then, in the 18th century, Clive completed the conquest of India for the British. Now, once again, India is about to be overrun. In 1942, the Allied campaign suffers on every front. In North Africa, Rommel prepares to strike. In the Atlantic, German U-boats strangle Allied shipping. On the Eastern Front, the Germans launch their drive toward Stalingrad. In the Pacific, Singapore falls. The Dutch East Indies are overwhelmed. Now the Japanese drive through Burma. India is the goal.
Our Navy had been driven out of the Bay of Bengal. We had been apparently outmatched in the air. Our resources were slender and strained to the full. Our armies had surrendered or were recoiling before the devastating strokes of Japan.
While India is threatened, the Allies face the need to supply China. The Burma Road has been cut by the Japanese. China is isolated.
The Americans were carrying all supplies for the Chinese armies by air over the Himalayas, which they called the Hump. This was a stupendous task, an incredible feat of transportation over mountains 22,000 feet high, over ground where an engine failure means certain death.
In Burma, the rivers are stained with Allied blood as the 17th British Indian Division falls back before the Japanese advance.
It was obvious that a further retreat to the Sitang River was imperative if the whole force was not to be lost. Over this swift-flowing river, 500 yards wide, there was only one bridge. When the division successfully fought its way back to the riverbank, it found the bridge destroyed and the broad flood before it. "3,300 men continued to cross this formidable obstacle, but only 1,400 rifles and a few machine guns survived. Every other weapon and all equipment were lost. This was a major disaster. I have not become the king's first minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire.
In India, the political situation is unstable and inflamed. The frail Mohandas Gandhi, India's spiritual leader, stands in the forefront of his country's struggle for independence. Other political leaders are Jinnah of the Muslim League and Nehru, president of the National Congress.
The stresses latent in Indian politics grew. Although only a small extremist section, led by such men as Subhas Bose, were directly subversive and hoped for an Axis victory, the powerful body of articulate opinion which supported Gandhi ardently believed that India should remain passive and neutral in the world conflict.
President Roosevelt suggests to the Prime Minister that India is in the same situation as the 13 American colonies had been in 1776.
This was no time for a constitutional experiment with a period of trial and error to determine the future relationship of India to the British Empire. Nor was the issue one upon which the satisfying of public opinion in the United States could be a determining factor. Happily, I had all my principal colleagues who had studied the Indian problem in agreement with me.
Roosevelt insists the four freedoms include the freedom to be free. Churchill believes that immediate withdrawal of British authority will lead to anarchy. Self-government must wait until the end of the war. Despite the pacifist attitude of Gandhi and his followers,
upwards of 2.5 million Indians volunteered to serve in the forces. And by 1942, an Indian army of 1 million was in being.
April 43. Throughout the year, the Japanese advanced steadily through Burma.
This campaign goes from bad to worse, and we are being completely outfought and outmaneuvered by the Japanese.
Exhausted British forces and hard-pressed commanders, General Slim remembers that time.
In mid-April, in a fierce attack, the Japanese pierced the front of my weakened Burma division on the bank of the Irrawaddy. And as it withdrew, the inevitable happened. It was cut off in the oil fields at Yananyang. And there, amid the flames, the smoke, and the explosions, amid crashing oil derricks and blazing tanks, it fought a nightmare battle. In the last stages of the long retreat from Burma, it was a toss-up which of our three enemies caught up with us first. Starvation through the failure of our rations, immobility caused by the rain of the monsoon, or our fierce pursuing Japanese enemy. Actually, it was the Japanese.
Out of the darkness of defeat, a great jungle fighter is soon to appear.
Ord Wingate made his mark as a leader of irregulars in Abyssinia and had greatly distinguished himself in the jungle fighting in Burma. He is a man of genius and audacity.
Wingate, a hard, silent, moody man, a Bible in his boot, slips through Japanese lines into Burma with 8 jungle columns. British, Indian, Burmese, and Gurkha commandos trained in guerrilla tactics. For months, Wingate's Chindits, named for the dragons guarding Burmese temples, panic the enemy, spread confusion, destroy forever the myth of Japanese invincibility. August 4, Churchill leaves for the Quebec Conference to plan military strategy in Europe and Asia. At the Quebec Conference, Lord Mountbatten is appointed Supreme Commander of the Southeast Asia Command.
Mr. Churchill summoned me to the Citadel, where he was living. He said to me, "How are you feeling?" He was referring to the fact I'd had a bad go of flu recently. I said, "I'm quite all right again, thank you, sir." "What do you think of the situation in Burma and Southeast Asia?" he asked me next. "Well, I think they're a pretty good mess. Certainly the biggest mess I think we've seen in any theater in the war." He agreed and said, do you think you could go out and put it right?" Well, I naturally thought he meant that I should go out on behalf of the chiefs of staff on one of these fact-finding tours and give him a report. I certainly didn't want to do that. I wanted to get back to the war, at sea if possible. And so I said, "Couldn't you send General Ismay, your chief of staff, to do that?" He said, "What do you mean? Don't you understand that I'm offering you a chance to go out there as Supreme Allied Commander and run the show yourself? What have you got to say to that?" Well, it was a pretty good shock to me, but I'm afraid I covered it up with one of my usual rather cheeky replies. I said to him, "Well, sir, I've got a congenital weakness for thinking I can do anything."
The President and General Marshall are very keen on Mountbatten's appointment. There is no doubt of the need of a young and vigorous mind in this lethargic and stagnant Indian scene.
February 1944. In the jungle, Wingate's Chindits attack once more.
One brigade, the 16th British, marched across 450 miles of mountain and jungle and was supplied solely from the air.
Roosevelt says, by the news of our success under Wingate.
Wingate did not live long to enjoy this first success or to reap its fruits. On March the 24th, to my great distress, he was killed in the air. With him, a bright flame was extinguished.
British and Indian soldiers are stuck in the mud of the monsoon and surrounded by the enemy, desperately short of supplies and ammunition. In northern Burma, General Stilwell and his Chinese troops slugged through the jungle. cooperating with Stilwell are Merrill's marauders. Through long, exhausting marches in rain and tropic heat, they fight through to capture the only all-weather airstrip at Myitkyina. The Burma road to China is open to supplies again.
The climax came in May 1944. 60,000 British and Indian soldiers, with all their modern equipment, were confined in a circle on the Imphal plains.
May 4, 1944. Prime Minister to Admiral Mountbatten.
Let nothing go from the battle that you need for victory. I will not accept denial of this from any quarter and will back you to the full. Be sure you win.
An aerial truck line feeds them ammunition and supplies.
Japan's invasion of India collapsed on the mountain plateau of Imphal at the end of June 1944.
Mountbatten was justified in adding, the Japanese bid for India was virtually over. The Prime Minister congratulates Mountbatten.
In honor of these great deeds of the Southeast Asia Command, His Majesty the King has commanded that a special decoration, the Burma Star, should be struck and the ribbons flown out to you at the earliest moment.
The famous 14th Army, under the masterly command of General Slim, having fought valiantly, having overcome all obstacles, finally achieves the seemingly impossible.
There comes always in every battle against a stout enemy a moment when the general, however clever he's been, whatever arrangements he's made, must hand over to the soldiers in the ranks and to their officers. That moment came early and often in Burma, when men were sick and tired and lonely, and it was only their spirit, their duty, and their patriotism that made them carry on. All those men of many races who, in the comradeship of the 14th Army and in the air forces which flew over them and fought with them, they were the men who turned defeat into victory.